maybe do the first poll.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome everyone. This is What's the Deal with Plant-Based? It's been a ways coming, and we were really excited that it's finally here. So we want to start by getting to know you all. So we put a little poll together to just figure out who's in the room. If you have a nutrition background, if you're a healthcare professional. So if you go ahead and just answer that poll that popped up. Thank you all. The results are coming in. This will just help us understand where you guys are coming from and gear our conversation a little bit. Okay, great. The results are in. So we have 20% of attendees are nutrition professionals. 40% are non-nutrition health professionals like physicians, pharmacists, nurses, NPs, PAs. And then another 40% are non-professional nutrition enthusiasts, and we are glad to have you. That's very exciting. So a lot of people who do not do nutrition for a living, but are curious about nutrition. So that's great. So I want to go ahead and give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. I guess I will start off since I'm already talking. I'm Leigh Frame. I am the Director of Integrative Medicine at George Washington School of Medicine and Health Sciences, or just GW for short, because that's a lot of things to say. And my background is in nutrition and immunology. And I also have some public health training. So that will be my perspective on this, but also coming from the integrative medicine world. PK, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Especially welcome to the non-nutrition professional nutrition enthusiasts, because you're my main audience. I spent my time studying nutrition biochemistry and then public health and then nutritional epidemiology. So I'm sort of a major science geek that's interested in all things food from farm to fork. So my research career has centered on plant-based diets and chronic disease prevention. And I was in academia up until 2012, and then I segued into being a science communicator because there's so much nutrition confusion out there that I'm anxious to really help people understand what it is the truth, what it is not. And by the way, I'm a little distractedly. I can see you and I can see the slide. I can't see me. Can other people see me?
Oh, we can see you, yes.
Okay, cool, weird.
Okay, that is weird.
Okay, no, it's fine. So anyway, so yes, I'm a science communicator now and author, and anxious to connect with you guys and, you know, get some facts out there with all the nutrition misinformation.
Excellent, thanks PK. And last but certainly not least, Lara.
Hi, thank you and welcome everybody. It's always a good day when we get to talk about food and nutrition. It's definitely one of my favorite topics. So I am a pharmacist. I'm an integrative pharmacist. I am a CNS nutritionist, and I specialize in functional medicine. I basically sit at the intersection of where traditional medicine and pharmacology meets nutritional medicine and phytotherapy. And I developed actually an interest in public health myself a few years ago in working with underserved populations, domestically and abroad, although mostly abroad. And so I am actually a proud student at George Washington's program for public health.
Excellent, yes. And as with all of us, a lifelong learner, and really proving that by actually going back and getting another degree. That's fantastic.
Last one, I promise, last one.
Yeah, we all say that. I just finished my master's of education, and my last one was supposed to be my PhD. So, so let's get down to what we're here to talk about. So what is the deal with plant-based? We want to know what you guys think first. So we have a poll here to go ahead and let us know, what do you think plant-based is? So Megan, if you go ahead and pull that up for us. And while you're voting, I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to Lara if you want to do some of the housekeeping items.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So while you guys are voting, I just want you to keep in mind that we want to encourage a conversation. So please use the chat box feature to connect with other folks that are on the call, to connect with us, with the panelists, although we might be chatting. I don't know how much we'll get into the chat, but I like to peek in there sometimes and get into that conversation as well. If you have a question for one of the panelists, please put that into the Q&A box. There's actually a separate button on your Zoom app for the Q&As. That really helps us make sure we curate the questions. You can actually upvote questions, and that helps us understand what you guys really want to make sure that we address during the Q&A at the end. Make sure you check your email after today. We will be sending out some additional resources, including some of the stuff that we mentioned, and I want to make sure you don't miss that. And we are recording today's session, so if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you want to share this with a friend, please make sure to circulate that around as well.
Excellent, thank you. So our poll results are in. First, I saw we had a question on how many people are logged in. We currently have about 60 people logged in. Hopefully we'll still have some more joining us. And the results are, well, first of all, everyone knows what a plant is, which I'm very excited to see. We weren't sure. We thought we'd put it in there just in case you'd never seen a plant before. And most people answered that 75% from plants is what they think plant-based is. That was 67% of people who are here. The next most popular one was 100% from plants, with 29% of you all thinking that's the answer. And then a few of you put 50% from plants, about 4%. So as you can tell just from this group, there is a little bit of confusion as to what plant-based actually is. So we're going to go ahead and define that for you. What is plant-based? TK, do you want to take that? I feel like you've got a good handle.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Oh, good. Yeah, I can see myself. That's harder because otherwise I'm wondering what you're saying. Awesome. Thank you for Megan for that. So what is plant-based? You know, plant-based means exactly as it sounds, based in plants. I also kind of like to call it plant-powered sometimes in my own lexicon, but no, it's plant-based. That doesn't mean plants only. Otherwise, maybe it would be plants only, or it would be vegan, right? Vegan is 100% plants and free of any animal products. As you all know, probably from there, it goes to pescatarian, may include fish, but lacto-ovo may include eggs and dairy, as the name suggests. But plant-based really was coined, through a number of people coined it, and it would end up becoming an issue with my own research because I do research on dietary patterns, meaning not just one food, not just one nutrient, what people are eating as a whole, their whole diet. And what we had found, as I'll talk more about later, is that plant-based diets, those that were mostly plants, are healthful, that we'll talk about. So really it's just having most of your diets be plants. And to help you quantify that just a tiny bit more, there is actually no quantification. So it's not 75%, we're throwing that in there to give you a ballpark, but it's not quantified like that. If you go to, for example, United States dietary guidelines, the My Plate, or if you go to the Harvard Health Eating Plate, if you go to the Canada Healthy Plate, all of them depict a plate, a round plate, that's around a quarter fruits, a little bit more than a quarter vegetables, and around a quarter whole grains. That's 75%. So if you would like to use that as a starting point, you could, but then if you have your plant-based proteins like I do, then it's even higher than 75%. But the point is, it doesn't need to be only plants, and that's so important. And we're all going to talk about that a little bit because that's a little bit overwhelming for a lot of people, right? People don't necessarily want to become a vegan. So vegan does not equal plant-based, and that's a common definition among nutrition people, and we really want to get that word out there today. So if anyone else wants to jump in and underscore that, no, you don't need to be a vegan to gain the benefits of a plant-based diet. Plant-based means based in plants. And the more the better, by the way.
Perfect. That is exactly the message. Our primary message is what is plant-based, and hopefully you've gotten a little taste of that. We will give you a lot more background on that in a minute. But I wanted to give Lara opportunity to just throw in things that she sees in the clinic that maybe relate to what is plant-based, conversations she's had, confusions people have, and why this conversation needs to be had.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the confusion that we're seeing around this, I feel like there's two sides to it when it comes to actual implementation. there is understanding what you're supposed to do and what you're trying to do if you're trying to, quote, attain good health. And I think then there's the practical implications of what that ends up meaning. And if all we focus on is the idea that it has to be plants, and that we start villainizing then animal products, especially animal products that come from traditional sources and clean sources, I think you end up doing is sort of creating a shaming culture around folks who maybe want to eat more traditionally. I think of myself, for example, I come from a Middle Eastern home. If I told my grandmother that she couldn't have yogurt with her breakfast, I think she would like lose it. Like she would just think I was like coming from another planet. So I think about those implications. I also think about what it means to then substitute for plant products for animal products. So I think about, for example, margarine. Margarine is a plant-based butter substitute. I would argue that that is not a better alternative to just having butter or having ghee or something like that. And so I think just reframing the idea that substitution doesn't necessarily mean imitation. Substitution just implies to use a plant source when possible. So I would say, what other oils could be considered healthy oils that might substitute for butter if you don't want to do butter, although I can probably argue there's some great benefits to doing butter or ghee as well, especially if they're coming from a grass-fed source. So I guess I worry that when folks focus a little too much on being 100% plant-based or 100% plant-focused, that some decisions then either become more complicated and they start losing diversity. And I also think it starts to then put into question the quality of the food that they end up choosing.
Thank you. And I think that's sort of in line with the concern that I have. And I use the term that perfection is the enemy of good. Perfection doesn't really exist, right? If your diet is perfect, you've taken it probably to the extreme and you're probably stressing yourself out and not living your life. And that's probably not what you want to be doing. You probably don't want to spend your whole life trying to make your diet perfect. So good is good, right? To do 75% plant-based is healthy. Or if if you aren't eating a lot of plants now, just moving in the direction of eating more plants, that's a positive thing. And I would never want someone to feel like there's no point in me trying because I'm never going to reach a plant-based diet, thinking that means it has to be 80 or 100% or any of those things. Like PK was saying, it's not quantitative. It's about having most of your diet plants. And if you can reach any element of that, you're going to see some of the benefits, which we're going to talk a little bit about now.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, just to re-emphasize your point about stress. I think that's another big thing that I see is folks are so worried about doing it right. The enjoyment of the food goes away, the ability to just, really be a part of the family gathering or the event, sort of that goes away. And it's really, you're just adding more cortisol and stress, and that's not necessarily helpful.
Yeah, and I think to add in, if I might, am I unmuted? I think Megan, I can't tell.
You're good.
Can we hear me? Awesome. Yeah, I think to add to that, I think we all agree very much. I mean, my interest in nutrition stemmed from food. I worked in the restaurant industry for many years. I grew up cooking, baking, gardening. I have a big sweet tooth. I love food. One of my favorite quotes that I use in all of my writing, it's the first page of my books, is when you get right down to it, food is practically the whole story every time. So how food affects your health is one aspect, meaning your physical health. And that is, of course, the crux of nutrition. But there's so much more to food than that. And we never want to lose sight of that. And I think also, just to clarify or respond to one of Lara's comments that I don't think we're not gonna have time to get into in this conversation. But yeah, I don't agree that butter has the same healthful effects as plant-based oils. And the plant-based margarines of today actually do not contain trans fats. And the issue with margarines of yore, and anyone listening from the 80s will remember this, was that they were shown to be related to heart disease because of the trans fats. So liquid oils are your best bet. And we're not going to digress further, because also if you look at the animal industry and the way cows are raised and the impact on the environment, there are probably better choices than butter as your regular go-to oil. Not that butter can't be delicious if you're a cook like I am once in a while, but you really want to rely on those heart-healthy, unsaturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats.
Right, and that gets back to the perfect meat enemy of good. Just because you're living a plant-based lifestyle doesn't mean that you can't splurge and have some butter on a beautiful baguette someday, right? Like that's, if you're in Paris, go for it.
I think that is perfection. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, you look at dietary patterns, like we'll talk about, it's never an all or none. We all eat a whole bunch of things. For the most part, it's all in varying degrees. So that's why when I mentioned, oh, maybe I'll have butter and something once in a while until they make an amazing plant-based butter that works well in my buttercream, I have a fixation on that. I'm going to go to butter, right? But I think that that's not your regular part of your diet. Your go-to is your olive oil, your grapeseed oil, your walnut oil, you know, or what have you. But we all clearly love food, and especially Lara, I can only imagine what meals were like at your house growing up. My mouth is watering.
Yeah, the Mediterranean diet, that's the ultimate, right? That's where most of the literature is.
I know everybody says their grandmother was the best cook. My grandmother was literally the best cook.
I believe it. I believe it.
That's wonderful. So you can see we all have a passion for this, and I'm thinking a lot of people here probably also have a similar passion. Food is part of culture. It's part of what we grow up. It's more than just the fuel for our body, but it is the fuel for our body. And we want to talk a little bit about that and why it's important to at least consider a plant-based diet. I think PK is going to lead us off by talking about chronic disease.
Oh, me again. I thought it was going to be Lara first. Okay, sure. It's like now I'm really feeling like I'm dominating the conversation. Do you want to jump in, Lara, since I was just doing this, and do your phytonutrients first, or you want me to start?
No, jump in.
Okay. All right. So as I was mentioning, you know, my career is dedicated, but my research career, meaning when I was actually a research scientist at my various universities, what I did was I was part of the movement in nutrition to say, no, food is not just an isolated nutrient, right? So when we look at fat as its own component, or we look at a vitamin as its own component and take that away from the whole food, we just don't see the same effects. And we could go on and cite studies, and studies not even from now, but from decades ago, that showed when people extracted that single nutrient, as we used to call them, you really wouldn't be getting the same effects. And in fact, you could sometimes get a deleterious effect that was going to lead to increased risk of disease. And there are some very famous trials that showed that. So I was part of a movement, not the leader by any chance, but one of the leading people later who started saying, hey, we need to think about diet and disease a different way. We need to think about the whole diet. So we came up with a lot of fancy methods to get at that. And that's why you keep on hearing me come back to, it's the whole diet that matters. You know, the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, right? The sum is greater than each individual part. So when we talk about plant-based diets, we talk about rich in all kinds of things, you know, in vegetables, in fruits, in legumes, in nuts, in whole grains. And these are, whether whole foods are obviously ideal, but obviously you can get really good results from canned foods as long as they're low sodium, and so forth and so forth. So dietary patterns is how I focus my career. First on, well, what is a dietary pattern? And then I looked at them in a lot of different disease settings and a lot of different disease outcomes. I'm an epidemiologist by training at the doctoral level, and also in different cohorts. Okay. And then of course, then you look at the whole literature. So this isn't just about me. But what we're finding again and again and again is that people who consume a plant-based diet, and specifically what I mean by that is a diet, again, that is based in plants, relative and higher than the other people in the group. So there's always a relative, you know, piece here, that it's not just, you know, in a vacuum. All right. So basically what we find is that those in a higher, you know, consuming more plants are getting lower type 2 diabetes. They are a better weight, a healthier weight. They have decreased risk of heart disease, decreased risk of stroke, decreased risk of various cancers. These are all of the benefits from health. And you get this again from a plant-based diet. You can't say then, okay, you know, I'm going to just eat blueberries because that's the superfood du jour. That's what I saw on the TV. So I should load up on that. And in fact, we know that the poison is in the dose, right? So you can actually OD on carrots. And if you do that, well, your skin will turn orange, among other things, because your body doesn't need that much, and it can be toxic in some situations. So it's really about balancing. The more diverse, the more variety. A lot of research has also shown you're going to get that reduction in chronic disease. And again, let's focus mainly on cardiovascular disease, stroke, obesity are the main ones. And again, some cancers. Cancer's a little bit trickier because cancer is so specific by site, and we know it's much more complex disease. So we'll be able to learn more about that. But yeah, I think that's one thing I wanted to make a point about. And we see that in lots of settings. So this isn't just, I mentioned my own research because it's my own research area, so I'm well versed in it, but I mention it, it's not just about me, it's about what the consensus is in nutrition. So you're always looking not just to one researcher who might be biased by their own findings, in this case, me. What you're looking to is the dietary guidelines and consensus, and not just within a country, but around the world. So we have the World Health Organization, we have the CDC. I already mentioned you have the USDA, the dietary guidelines, Canada's Healthy Plate, you have Harvard's Health Eating Plate, and they all have reached the same consensus that a plant-based diet, meaning higher in plant-based foods, lower in animal foods, and particularly swapping out beef and dairy for more healthful options, not only for your own health, but also for the environment, is going to be the best bet. So and if you're paying attention to this, whether you're a nutrition professional or maybe if you're an enthusiast, you're looking at the things online or the reports online. Recently, we had the Dietary Guidelines Committee for 2025, the report come out from the scientific committee, and it's reaching the same conclusions. And by the way, you can't just load up on the plant and still have all your sugar and still have all your salt, right? You still need to use your common sense and know you can't forget about some of the other basic things that nutrition science has shown. So it's still part of your big, it's still part of your dietary pattern. But I really want to emphasize here that this is about consensus and what thousands of studies and thousands of researchers, not here in the US, but everywhere, have shown to be relevant to health promotion. And I didn't mention a big one, which is longevity, right? Longevity. Energy balance is also important. So you can't load up on all these plants and then suddenly you're at unhealthy weight. You're not going to get the same effects. So you always have to pay attention to the big picture. And I think I could return, but I don't want to keep talking, but I would say one really quick point about the blue zones, if any of you are familiar with that. The blue zones is a concept popularized by Dan Buettner. And the bottom line I want to make from it, if you're not, you can Google it later, hopefully not right now, but you can look into it later. And the bottom line is it found that 5 different groups around the world enjoy the longest lifespan, live the longest, and they're all plant-based diets. And guess what? The big thing is that they look completely different, right? So plant-based does not mean everything looks identical. You need to take what plant-based is, and then you need to make that work for you in a way that's sustainable, that adheres to basic nutrition guidelines, and is going to work for your life. So someone in Japan, Okinawa, who's eating a lot of tofu and who's eating a lot of rice and who's eating sushi and who's eating green tea and drinking green tea and all of those things is going to be different from someone in the Nicoyan Peninsula in Costa Rica who's eating a lot of rice and beans and tortillas and all of those things. So these are completely different diets, but they're all plant-based and they all limit animal foods greatly.
That is the perfect sum up of that point, PK. Thank you so much for pointing that out. And I would say that, yes, this is obviously the consensus in almost every aspect. So you were focusing on chronic disease, and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the gut microbiome, which basically is going to back up everything that PK said, but just in a different system. So what is the gut microbiome? First thing. So it's the bugs that live on us and in us. It's bacteria, it's fungi, it's viruses, and they all form an ecosystem in whatever organ that we're talking about. Frequently, we're looking at the gut. We're looking at the gut microbiome because that's where your food goes, and that's sort of the center of your body in terms of health. You need to get nutrition in, and you need to excrete things out. And then if those things are not happening, then you will not be healthy. So we focus a lot on gut health, particularly in integrative medicine and nutrition, because it is so central. And what all the research in the gut microbiome, which by the way is emerging, it's an emerging field. So we don't have a great handle like we do in PK studies, where there's thousands of studies and they've been studying it for 30 years. The gut microbiome is a new field, but what we are finding is that the #1 marker of health for the gut microbiome is diversity, the number of bacteria, the number of viruses. And then what leads to that? A diverse diet. So when we see studies, we see over and over again that the number of plants consumed is the strongest relationship with the number of bacteria or viruses or whatever that are in your gut microbiome. So a more diverse diet leads to a more diverse gut microbiome, which leads to health. So again, backing up this idea that it should be about plants, the number of plants that you can get in, because that's what the gut really cares about. They care about fiber, they care about phytonutrients, which Lara is going to tell you a little bit about. So if you're not getting enough variety, like what PK was saying, if you're eating only blueberries, as much as they're great for you, you're not eating the rainbow, you're not getting all the different nutrients, you're not getting exposure to chemicals that are actually helpful that Lara's going to tell us about. So it's not about perfection. It's not about reaching a specific ideal diet. And part of that is because really the goal is about diversity. It's about getting the most exposure to different kinds of plants that you can. And you could do that by looking at some of these blue zones. You could look at the Okinawan diets and see how they integrate it into their world. For instance, green tea. I'm a big fan of green tea. I have that in the morning. It's delicious. And you know there's some health benefits behind it. So if that's something you can add into your diet, now you've exposed yourself to one more plant that day that you didn't have the day before.
Yeah, good point. You don't drink coffee, Leigh, just for the record?
I drink coffee on the weekends, which is kind of odd. And most people are not like that, but it's because I like to luxuriate over my cup of coffee, on the couch and relax and sit in the sunshine. Whereas the tea, I'm more kind of just sipping on as I'm checking my email. And it's not as much of a, experience for me.
Got it.
It's a good question.
I'm just curious. I'm a black coffee. Crazy about my black coffee.
I do like coffee as well.
Same.
And very rich in polyphenols.
I don't think I can, I don't think I could copy it, but I do appreciate your strategy, Leigh.
Thank you.
Now, I do black coffee in the morning, and I do tea in the afternoon often. So it's kind of like coffee, tea, water, alcohol, or the four beverages I consume, all in moderation, of course.
Right.
And all with their various health
except for the water.
benefits.
The water is not in moderation.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good point. Two thirst though, because you can't overdo water as well.
It's true.
That's a fair point. Yes.
But most people don't have that problem.
That's not a typical issue. Yeah.
Yes, true.
So I want to jump in actually on the diversity piece. And I want to actually add to, I sort of want to segue into it. So one of the things I want to bring in is the discussion about the microbiome, right? So to your point, Leigh, that microbiome piece we're figuring out more and more is such an integral part of what we're doing. There's a little background noise, so I'm just going to mute everybody who's not talking, just so that in case it's due to that. Okay, so there's a piece of the microbiome that we're starting to discover is sort of a big part of that communication, as you were saying. In fact, to sort of bring back the point, butter versus non-butter sources of fat, there is some evidence that the butyric acid in butter might actually help to support some of the integrity of the gut, as well as to feed some of the gut bacteria. There's also vitamin A in butter, which is supportive of the gut lining, which is supportive in immune balance. And as we're seeing more and more folks coming in with GI issues and the incidence of intestinal permeability and how it relates to chronic disease, AKA leaky gut, I think it's pertinent to think about all the different ways we might support that diversification of the microbiome and support the GI integrity. Where the phytonutrients come in, I tell my patients, if I told you that there was a trick to communicate on a cellular level via your DNA by giving it certain foods, I feel like that would be a strategy you'd want to jump all over. If you're worried about your risk of diabetes, you're worried about your risk of cancer, you're worried about your risk of insert chronic disease here, you actually can modulate that genetic risk by introducing phytonutrients. And for anybody who's not familiar with the term phytonutrients, essentially those are the chemicals that are naturally found in all plant food that gives a food some of its color. So when you see that diversity of color, when we talk about eating the rainbow, part of the reason we're saying eat the rainbow and we're encouraging that diversity is we want to encourage phyto or color diversity as well. Because by targeting those various colors, you're essentially getting as much of that diversity of those chemicals as possible. We mentioned tea. There are certain phytonutrients in teas, herbal teas, black teas, green tea in particular. There are phytonutrients, like I said, in all different plant foods. The general rule, the brighter the color, the more complex the color, the more phytonutrients you have available. So when we compare, for example, blueberries versus a banana, the blueberries are going to have a very different set of diverse phytonutrients that gives that beautiful bluish violet color, versus the banana might have a different set of phytonutrients that are going to give it that greenish, yellowish, whitish set of chemicals. And so those phytonutrients interact with your DNA, help to upregulate the protective mechanisms, downregulate the disease mechanisms, and do it via communication with the microbiome. This is what epigenetics is starting to focus on. And so essentially, if I can get every single person to try to diversify that phytonutrient rainbow as much as possible, then there's a better chance if we could flood our system with these phytonutrients, the way they work in concert when they come from food, the way they work with other components of the food, like fiber, like the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals, the way they all come together from food is really difficult to emulate in any other way. It's difficult to emulate with supplementation. It's difficult to emulate with, with meat for sure, because you don't have that diversity of those nutrients and you don't have the phytonutrients as part of it. And I think as PK eloquently said before, the research is super clear. It is about diversity. It's about the power of those plants. I suspect it's about plants being alive and really communicating with us energetically as well. I think there's a piece, there's sort of a magical component to it as well. But I think all those pieces together, come together and sort of keep showing over and over that having a plant-heavy diet is going to be good for you. And I think it's beautifully said that what that means to each individual is going to be different, whether it's an ethnic difference, a geographic difference, an economic difference. I think wherever you're at, whatever point that you are, the more you could diversify, the next level that you could take, the next step that you could take forward, I think is the right step. It's just about taking that step and doing your best to move the needle forward.
Absolutely. And I did want to circle back on one point about fiber that I neglected to mention. So first of all, if you don't know me very well, you don't know that I love fiber. There are two things in this world that I really get excited about: vitamin D and fiber. And it's because they're sort of far-reaching things. They're important for so many parts of your health. And one of the things about fiber that I think people don't realize is it can be really helpful with weight management. We're all struggling right now with COVID and snacking and controlling our weight. And fiber can make you feel fuller. And there's a fair amount of research out there showing that just increasing the amount of fiber in your diet can help with weight management. So how do you do that? Well, more plants. That's how you do it. So this may also be related to the health benefits of a plant-based diet, is you're increasing your fiber intake, which is important for your gut microbiome. It's important for keeping you regular, and all of the effects downstream. For instance, your gut microbiome eats the fiber and produces short-chain fatty acids. So Lara talked about butyrate. And there's all sorts of short-chain fatty acids that are produced in the gut, and they actually feed the gut cells. So without that fiber to feed your gut microbiome, you aren't feeding your gut cells. And what is going to happen? Possibly leaky gut. So it's all interconnected, and it's all generally positive and probably pretty easy to implement if you think about it. Because what Lara's saying, right? Just add one more. You're just adding a little bit to your diet each time. And it doesn't have to look like anybody else's diet. So hopefully we are inspiring you a little bit. I know we're going to transition to how do we implement this? And Lara's going to kick it off with common barriers she sees in the clinic. Oh, you're on mute, PK.
Right, thank you. Megan, if you could take care of it, that'd be great. She's on the back end tech, everyone. So yeah, if I could just chime in with fiber too, because, well, I have 2 points actually. The first, let's keep with fiber. So what part of why plant-based diets are so beneficial is, as we've been talking about, is fiber. Fiber is huge. It's not just fiber, actually, it's also whole grains. So this is a good example. Well, of course, I say there's 2 points. I could go on, but there's fiber is actually a nutrient, right? And it's a non-starch polysaccharide, and it's a non-digestible polysaccharide. And part of the fact that it's not digested and is excreted, and we already heard about the effects of short-chain fatty acids, all of that stuff. Part of the reason it is so beneficial is because of the satiety effects, the filling effects. And plant-based diets are high in fiber, what you get from a lot of sources, but kind of we've seen in a lot of studies, if you just extract the fiber, you're not going to get the same results. So again, it comes down to the sources of that fibers, and there's different types of fibers. So whether it's from your plants, your vegetables, your fruits, your whole grains, you want a diversity and variety of those, as we've been kind of underscoring again and again, so you can get different types of fibers that are going to be both filling and also exert salubrious health effects. But another thing about plant diets is it's fiber and water. Okay, fiber and water, it's those 2 things together that gives you a really nice satiety effect. That's why soups and salads, which we'll talk about later in my book, is such a major part of my diet. It's not the only reason, of course, but it's those 2 really powerful nutrients that together help you feel fuller. And then one other point I did want to make, and by the way, obesity, so plant-based diets and obesity and weight maintenance, that's actually my very specific area of expertise. So beyond chronic disease, plant-based diets and weight is my special area from a research perspective. But one other thing I wanted to mention about phytonutrients, phyto meaning plant, and nutrients or phytochemicals just meaning your powerful chemicals from plants. So really easy to remember. Again, phyto being from plant, zoonutrients, zoo meaning animal, totally different, and also have some nice health effects too. But phytonutrients aren't just in the rainbow, meaning, red, orange, yellow, green, purple, green, blue, purple. Actually, white is increasingly recognized as also including powerful phytochemicals like quercetin. So quercetin is something found in the outermost layers of onions. So we get a lot of health effects from garlic, from the allium family vegetables. So I think that just remember that white is in there too. And of course, bananas are very high in potassium. They don't have, which is a mineral that's important for blood pressure. So I think, again, over time, people started focusing just on those beautiful bright colors. And yes, they're incredibly powerful. We could start talking about each of them individually with their health effects, whether it's the deep purple anthocyanins and zeaxanthins in blueberries and an eggplant, or a whole other range of other ones. But the white vegetables really do have their own powerful effects, not to mention sulfur and lots of ... So again, if you don't want to remember all this, the key, the more plants, the more diversity, keeping the skins where a lot of those powerful phytonutrients lie.
Stop peeling your vegetables.
Yeah, totally. It's a massive cause of food waste, and you're taking away your nutrition and beautiful colors. So yeah, absolutely. So that's all.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Those are very important points, and actually many of them are ones that I typically make, so you were totally backing me up on that.
Exactly. I mean, we all know this. So just as you guys were getting more specific, I was like, oh, I should mention a little bit more about the mechanism for plant-based diets. But again, remember, you can't divorce things, from their foods. And we all know this, and you guys got to remember this too. It really is, it's the synergies. Many people are familiar with the fact that you absorb more iron in the presence of vitamin C. That's an example of synergism, meaning 2 things together have a more powerful effect together than they do alone. And that's something we see again and again and again in nutrition that undermines why the whole diet is so important.
Perfect. I think that's a great place to go into implementation.
Absolutely.
Lara?
Back to Lara.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to, I think all this makes sense. All this sounds amazing. And I think that at the end of the day, it becomes a question of practicality for a lot of people. So I put it usually, there's 2 buckets that I have seen. One let's assume access. Let's assume everybody has access to a beautiful variety of vegetables. They are in a place where they either have access to a farmer's market or a great shopping resource. Let's assume that that has been fulfilled. From there, it becomes time and skill. So I find that a lot of people struggle with time management. To carve out time during the day to prepare fresh food can be challenging. And so a lot of folks also with their busy schedules, maybe now everybody's a little bit more at home, but folks are typically, you know, on the go, on their way to work, on their way home. They want to pick up something fast and convenient. And so I think the convenience of picking up food that might be less healthy, less biodiverse, less phytodiverse becomes easier, and that becomes the default. So one is, how do you account for the time needed? And two, I think a lot of folks have sort of gotten away from being able to have basic kitchen skills. I find a lot of folks are enamored by watching these amazing culinary shows, and they're so inspiring, and those chefs are absolutely amazing, but they're chefs, they're professionals. And I think the idea that we have to have these like perfectly curated meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I think becomes overwhelming. And it really isn't about that. It's honestly, it's about simplicity, and it's about what is manageable for you in the time that you have. And then when you have more time, when you have the ability to maybe like bring the family into the kitchen and work on a beautiful meal together, and have, you know, the kids be the sous chefs and your husband's out on the grill, or you're like, you know, manning the salad or whatever. I think that part of it then becomes a part of the community building. I think the food prep should include as much community as much as the sitting and eating. And I think that's what we've sort of gotten away from as a culture. We've gotten away from appreciating that time of sitting together and talking and eating and enjoying and picking at the food before it's done. We sort of don't do that anymore. And I think a lot of what our expectations are for our meals and what the time that we spend developing skills to make food taste delicious, I think might have been lost in all that shuffle. I mean, I remember going back to my grandmother, shout out to my grandma today. I remember sitting with her in the kitchen as she would be peeling or chopping or prepping or making whatever she was making. And it was always like sort of the family gathering place where we would all sort of walk in, grab something off her cutting board, or sit and talk to her, or she would just hand you something and tell you to do it, and you don't say no to grandma. So there's, you know, this aspect that I think we don't have because there's a time constraint. And I think if we could get back into finding room for that, I think that would help. And I think it would make people want to try new vegetables and new ways to cook them. But at the same time, also having some straightforward ways to cook and make things taste palatable, especially if you're not used to vegetables. If you're still diversifying, it might taste bitter for you. Maybe you're a hyper taster, and so some of the vegetables are a little too intense for you right now. Learning how to introduce them in a way that can help develop your palate and develop an appreciation for those new flavors, I think is part of it. And I find that most people don't have a hard time cooking a chicken or searing a steak or barbecuing, you know, blank, right? Like a burger or whatever. I think most people are challenged in finding fun, easy, time-efficient ways to have vegetables that are different, that it's not just broccoli every day, or it's not just spinach every day. And I don't know what to do if I buy collard greens or rainbow chard. I don't know how to leverage eating more onions. I don't love onions raw, but I'm not really sure if I cook them, if it's going to be overpowering. I think those sort of tricks and techniques and ways to really make food pleasurable and make the experimentation worthwhile, I think that's what we need more of. And that is cue to PK right there.
Yes, absolutely it is. Oh, you're on mute again, PK. Let me unmute you.
I unmuted me a couple times. Did you hear what I said? Oh, now I can't hear anyone else. Yeah, that's
Yeah, go ahead and repeat it. We didn't hear.
Alrighty. So Lara, my question for you was, before I jump in with some of my own recipes, what are some of your own memories of, or your favorite recipes that your grandmother makes? I want to know.
Ooh, I've been on a tabbouleh kick. If anybody's following me on Instagram, I've been talking about it incessantly. I go through phases where there's like a vegetable that I'm like really obsessed with. And so right now, if you open my fridge, there's about 5 stalks of parsley, just on the regular. Like I just buy a lot of parsley because lately I'm just obsessed with it. And so I've been having this conversation about, some people see parsley as a garnish. I see it as a straight up leafy green. Parsley, yeah. I see it as a straight up leafy green. And I am, I love tabbouleh. So for those of you who don't know what tabbouleh is, it's essentially, it's a salad traditionally made out of either couscous or bulgur, which is a cracked wheat grain, with a lot of parsley, mint. Some people add cilantro, garlic, and tomato, and it's usually a lemon and olive oil dressing and some salt. And so that is like what I think one of my like comfort food type, like if I make that, I'll like make a whole big bowl of it thinking it's going to last me a while. And then I eat it in like 2 sittings. That's really fun.
I hear you. Well, that's also a good segue back to me, because I love tabbouleh as well. And so what I did in my own kitchen, and I'll introduce that more in a moment, but is do kind of plays on that. And of course, nothing better than traditional tabbouleh. But so for example, one of the ones I had, and it was just farmer's market inspired, and it's actually a recipe in my free cookbook, has cherries, snap peas, of course, parsley. Like you, I'm obsessed with parsley. And whenever my mother's like, well, what to do with parsley? I was like, what not to do with parsley? I mean, right? It's not just a garnish at all. I don't even use it that way at all, right? I mean, it's so delicious, so bright, and obviously really healthful as well, and adds so much flavor to food. So I'm like you, I always have parsley in my fridge. Not to mention, you can pesto parsley, people, but that's alliteration. Parsley, maybe parsley and pecans, parsley and pistachio is actually, I like that. Prefer that pesto to the traditional basil genovese, right? Which is basil and pine nuts. They're both herb and nut based. And by the way, you don't even need cheese. You can use nutritional yeast, but I digress. I learned that only recently because I do eat cheese. And so
I actually just started doing that too. It tastes just as good. And I freeze mine, and I think it freezes better.
It's amazing that I cannot tell the difference. And so I think a lot of these things, and Lara's making this point either, is exposure and giving it a shot, trying it. And because I never was into nutritional yeast. My brother is a vegan, and then I've had it in a cheese sauce. I was like, it's not cheese. And I kind of like my cheese. But here, didn't notice it. So and then you're, by the way, cutting down calories too and increasing protein. So it really is a really good swap. It's a hack out there. That's on my blog, by the way. So, Lara was talking a little bit about some ways to make it your own. And I concur with everything that she's been saying. We're obviously all avid eaters and cooks. And so what I started doing in my journey when I moved from academia to science communication, I started to also bring in my cooking background and expertise. So I actually cooked in a vegetarian restaurant in college, and I worked in restaurants for 10 years on and off to put myself through school, I think, as I was telling you before. So I started blogging as a way to help people put these things into practice, because we already know the plant-based diets. We've known for a long time now that they are optimal for health, disease prevention, and all the good things we've been talking about. But again, so people are like, okay, so what do we do? Because we don't want, this isn't days of yore when we had like 70s, not tasty, bland, brown food. This isn't like that. We're talking about vibrant colors. We're talking about snappy vegetables. We're talking about beautiful herbs that we've been talking about, parsley, now actually in season, although it's in season lots during the farmer's market. So if you're lucky enough, like I am, to get to your farmer's market, that's great. If you aren't, obviously you can use fresh, frozen, whatever you want from your local supermarket. And I think, what I did is, and I think this is where we wanted me to get into, what I started doing during the pandemic. We're still obviously in a pandemic. We're here having a lovely conversation about plant-based diets, but let's not forget the fact that we are in the midst of a massive, massive pandemic, and it's really impacting the way people eat. And people started asking me, well, do you have some ideas for some plant-based recipes? What do you think? And I sort of said, well, you know what, I do. I mean, I have about 400 recipes on my blog. So I was like, well, they're already there. Why do I need to kind of chime in? And people can just Google, right? I'm not the only one. There's plenty of great cooks out there. So I didn't really feel comfortable talking about it when so many people were becoming unemployed or dying from COVID or sick from COVID, or, by the way, couldn't afford food at all. We have really a major increase in hunger right now. And that is really close to my heart, just for lots of different reasons. And so for me, I decided to write this cookbook called How to Eat. It's just a free cookbook. You can download it. It highlights some of my favorite plant-based recipes from my blog, really colorful. Most of them are very easy. And, you know, again, it's free, but I'm hoping at the same time people might be inspired to give to Feeding America, because they are facing a 1.4 billion gap, increasing the people they're feeding from 34 million to 54 million. It's 37 to 54 million people. That's a lot of mouths. That's a lot of mouths. And that's just in the US. So I felt better about writing this, cookbook while people had the opportunity to give to Feeding America. So it's missing my book in the middle, at least on my slide. I'm not sure what's happening with that. The book is called How to Eat: Plant-Based Recipes to Save Your Life and Our Planet. There we go. And again, you can download it for free. And if you are feeling really generous, of course, you can give at the $500 level, but whatever you can give is going to really help out. And I set a very lofty $50,000 goal that I'm hoping to continue with this campaign over time, because it really is so important to me. And again, as unemployment rises, hunger is now on the rise as well. So it's just, I think it's let's take a moment, really appreciate that we're in a situation of privilege, all of us on this webinar, listening to this and having this conversation, because we're assuming that we can afford and access food in some way. And so many people are not as fortunate. So I would humbly ask you that if you're able to make a donation, I can't get there alone, and know that you're helping feed your neighbors. But either way, download the book for free, so it's not contingent. You don't have to make a donation in order to receive the book. Just go to that link, and you'll be able to both download the link and make a donation if you're so inclined. And thank you for considering. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. This is a great way to start getting some more plant-based recipes in your repertoire, diversifying what you're eating, both for health benefits, but also because we get bored of eating the same thing all the time. So yeah,
Yes.
You've got some new recipes. And we just want to talk a little bit about how else you can get plants in your diet. We started a chat here. People are talking about food prep. So, prepping for the week with your family. That's a great way to get more plants in your diet.
Nice.
Greens in smoothies. If you're having a smoothie for breakfast, why not throw some greens in there? It's going to increase the nutrition. You're having more diversity. And especially for kids, I like to hide vegetables in things that they don't know they're in there. For instance, if I'm going to make a chili, I usually shred a zucchini and put that in there too. Just on top of whatever I'm putting tomatoes and peppers and beans and all sorts of great things in there. But why not also shred a zucchini and increase that?
That's a good tip for adults too, by the way.
It's true. Yeah, I actually did it for my brother who's in his 30s. So yes, it does work for adults. People who don't think they like green things.
Yeah, I think sometimes color is intimidating for people, and if it's new, it's intimidating. So sometimes just sort of putting it into something. And look, I want to be careful here, because I don't think it's a good idea to trick anybody into eating anything. That causes a whole other disordered eating pattern, particularly with kids. We want to avoid that. But to that point, I think if somebody's really having a hard time with the texture or look of something, I think being able to put it into something else where it's not quite as overpowering of a flavor, and it could blend in, maybe the color's not so intimidating. I think it could really help to get that palate used to that flavor profile. And it's about exposure. I think a lot of people don't realize you're not just like born liking all the foods. Like, it takes exposure. It takes multiple times of trying something new, even if it's just a bite every couple weeks. to get used to that flavor profile, and eventually you start to develop a taste for it, and it becomes, hopefully becomes one of your favorites. I give my own personal example is beets. I'm probably the only nutritionist on the planet that's like meh about beets. I like them now, right? But it took me years. It's like taken me literally years to learn how to make them in a way that I like them, to get used to the flavor profile, to appreciate them, to appreciate the differences in the different varieties of beets. And I use that as an example to say that, it's about exposure and it's about figuring out how you like it. I think a lot of people sort of remember maybe mushy vegetables. Maybe mom wasn't the greatest cook. You didn't have my grandma to cook you dinner. So maybe mom wasn't the greatest cook. Maybe she didn't know how to make vegetables, or maybe you ate a lot of lima beans growing up and didn't have like access to fresh vegetables. And so you don't know what to do with kale, or you don't know what to do with, whatever, insert vegetable here. I think just experimenting with different ways of making it, which is why it's so great to have like a cookbook that you can just look at and say, oh, okay, I never thought to make it that way, or I never thought to pair it or garnish it in this way. I think that could go a long way.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We don't want to trick people into it, but we do have to get exposed to it and try it and get used to these new things. We are getting short on time, so I just wanted to mention that we have the Integrative Medicine podcast, and Lara's going to put up our little slide about that. So GW has a podcast, and we talk about these type of things all the time. So you can get it wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to our website and find it there. And we will include information in the email that's coming out after that. We are having PK come on for this coming month's podcast. So keep an eye out for that. It should be coming out in a couple of days. We usually put it out on the 1st. And we're going to talk more about what she's doing with Feeding America and the importance of food security. So tune in for that. And now we do have a couple of minutes for last points. If anyone wants to make a last point here, Lara or PK.
I would love to address a couple of questions with the last minute or so that we have.
Me? Can you guys see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Host, can you please enable me to be seen?
Oh, because you had to leave and come back.
So
in terms of
off again,
questions, I see we have one talking about plant allergies, and my reaction to that is that it's totally going to depend on the person, and we can't really even have that conversation because each person is different, and you really have to determine for yourself what foods affect you in terms of either an intolerance or a food allergy, or maybe just a slight sensitivity, so you can't have a ton of it, but you can eat that food. It's something to consider, but it's not really a general topic that we can talk about. That would easily be 2 more webinars by itself. I think we lost PK again.
Definitely. Yeah, I think her connection may not be awesome. Do you want to do one more?
I don't see any other questions. Do you see another question?
Yeah, if you go into the Q&A, there's quite a few of them.
I don't think I have access to that.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Yeah. How about? Yeah, there's a couple, and we'll all sort of pick at them. Do you got it?
Yeah. All
okay,
right. So there's a question here about whole foods, and I think that Lara and I would both be very pro whole foods, and part of the reason is that you're going to eliminate some of the things that PK mentioned, like sodium and sugar. So if you're having a whole food, you're not getting all those processed ingredients that you wouldn't need in your diet. The other thing too is, a whole food has some sort of magical capability. Eating an apple is not the same as eating all the different components that are in an apple separately or together. So a whole food is probably the way that you want to go.
Yeah.
Have you guys unmuted me yet?
Oh, we can hear you.
Has someone unmuted me?
We can hear you, PK.
Okay. I can't start my video because my host has disabled it. So I need you guys to do that. That's been the problem.
You should be able to now.
Well, if you can hear me, at least I'll say Okay, I'm back.
There, I
No,
can see you too.
my connection is just fine. So I don't know what's going on the back end, but I apologize. I will say a couple of things quickly because I know we're running low on time. First is I was able to hear, but you guys couldn't see me, and I wanted to agree and chime in for yay beets. I grew up picking beets from I'm late to the beet party, but you see, yes, and they're a big part of Mediterranean cuisine, but I grew up picking beets from the garden, and we're Canadian. So I don't know if beetroot is bigger in Canada because no one ate them. So I'm kind of obsessed with beets. In fact, I'm roasting them tonight for dinner. I'm a big roasting beet person. And by the way, not only does it retain all the nutrients, they are delicious, really easy. You put them in, coat them with olive oil, salt, pepper, and you roast them at 475 degrees for 40 minutes. Stick them with a knife. If they're tender, you bring them out. And guess what? The skins are delicious. The skins are delicious.
I don't peel mine either.
They're nice and crispy. And for years, I was just like, oh no, you're supposed to remove the skins. And even me, and I know this. And then then a couple of times I would just bring them. I was like, no, you don't need to remove the skins. So there is a lot of misinformation about removing skins from vegetables. And certainly you don't need to remove your peels from carrots, from cucumbers, any of those things. Again, we come back to that's where a lot of your nutrients lie. So again, it was the worst possible timing because I was like, yay beets, yay beets. It's like I eat them all the time. But yes, other than that, in terms of final points, I think that, make it your own. Make it your own. Plant-based diets, it needs to be delicious to make it work for you. And there's so many options, and be open. And whole foods, of course, we're talking about whole vegetables, whole grains, plant proteins. We were talking about whole nuts, legumes, all of these good things. And you guys already know all that, right? So the more you can load those up into your diet and the more healthful and more diverse it is, the better your health is going to be.
Well, I think we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But I see some questions here, and maybe we can try and answer some of them in the email that we're going to send out. One I can answer real quick is that beets and beetroot are the same thing. The beet is the root of the beet plant. The top greens actually look like Swiss chard, and they're also delicious. And I would say eat those too. So eat the whole plant, right?
Yeah, don't throw them again. Yeah, don't throw those away. They're delicious.
Yeah,
and
they're free
like
otherwise.
Any other green. Saute like them any other green. I just had those the other night too. So as I said, this is real life. This is all of us. This is not academic for us. This is the way we actually all eat. We practice what we preach. We all eat plant diets and based diets, and maybe in a different way based upon our own predilections and cost, convenience, lifestyle, all those things. Just like any of you out there, we all enjoy and relish in these beautiful plant-based diets.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Please keep your eyes peeled for more on the email, and we will probably also be doing more webinars in the future. I've already had a request to do one about inflammation and autoimmunity in nutrition, so we're going to look into potentially doing that. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.